All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking something truly massive. We're looking at one of the most complex, fascinating macroeconomic transformations in modern history, the economic journey of India. We're going to retrace the steps of a nation navigating its way through decades of strict controls, some pretty severe external shocks, and intense internal debates, all to eventually emerge as a formidable engine of global growth. Whether you're tracking global supply chains, international markets, or even geopolitics, understanding India's economy is absolutely essential. So let's get into it.
Now, this is the foundational question we've got to answer today. In the early decades right after independence, the Indian economy was largely stuck in what economists like to call a quiet crisis. Growth was, well, sluggish to say the least, and the whole system was weighed down by rigidities. Yet, if you look at it today, it's one of the fastest growing major economies in the world. So how exactly did that happen? What were the actual turning points? And honestly, what structural tensions are still bubbling under the surface today?
Okay, here's our roadmap for The Explainer. 1. Two eras of growth. 2. The road to 1991 reforms. 3. Agriculture, industry, and services. 4. The golden era. 5. Demographics. And 6. Poverty and global integration. Let's jump right in. Starting off with Section 1, Two eras of Indian growth. When you look at the modern economic history of India, you see this stark, night-and-day macroeconomic shift right around 1980. From 1950 to 1980, under the Nehru-Mahalanobis model, India followed some pretty heavily socialistic policies, and while the goal was to build up heavy industry, it relied on strict, rigid controls over private sector activity. This led to a lot of inefficiencies, rent-seeking behavior, and that quiet crisis we just mentioned. I mean, GDP growth was basically stagnating between 1% and 3.5%. But post-1980, everything changed. Accelerating heavily after 1991, India shifted toward market-based policies. And the result? GDP growth consistently pushed above 6%. It's like a completely different economy. Which brings us to Section 2, the road to 1991 reforms. Now, as you can probably guess, this transition definitely wasn't smooth. The path to high growth was paved by just a relentless sequence of exogenous shocks and internal crises. In 1965, you've got severe droughts and war. Then in 66, under heavy pressure from the World Bank and the IMF, India devalued the rupee, expecting a wave of foreign aid that never fully materialized. It was a true devaluation disaster. Jump to the 1970s, and you hit massive oil price shocks, soaring inflation, and the whole political crisis of the emergency in 1975. Fast forward a bit to 1990, and the invasion of Kuwait basically doubles oil prices again, absolutely crushing India's commercial borrowing capabilities and their foreign reserves. And that brings us to the absolute breaking point in 1991 under P.V. Narasimha Rao. Things were bleak. Inflation was hitting 12%. The fiscal deficit was over 10% of GDP. And get this, the external debt to exports ratio was a staggering 250%. To put that into perspective, the economy was literally on the sheer brink of default. This wasn't just some casual policy pivot. A radical, sweeping program of stabilization and liberalization was absolutely necessary just for basic survival. Moving right along to Section 3, Agriculture, Industry, and Services. To show you just how active and unresolved these structural questions are even today, take a look at this. This is an actual recent university exam paper for a course on Indian growth and development. Look at the questions. Students are actively asked to critically evaluate the performance of India's sectors since independence and identify the obstacles to sustaining high growth. It's a perfect real-world artifact of the exact economic tensions we're analyzing right now. And it highlights one of the most intense, hotly debated questions among economists globally. Has India deindustrialized prematurely? Think about it. When we compare India to many Latin American and African economies, or even the massive manufacturing powerhouses of East Asia, we really have to ask if India's industrial sector sort of stagnated right when it was supposed to be taking off. The reality on the ground is this incredibly complex balancing act across all three sectors. In agriculture, policymakers are facing a serious trilemma. They have to figure out how to increase farm income and growth, ensure equity for millions of smallholder farmers, and somehow maintain environmental sustainability all at once. Over in industry, the data points to a really debated post-reform stagnation in manufacturing, where job creation just hasn't met expectations. Meanwhile, the services sector, that's been the undeniable star of the show. It's completely defied traditional development models by driving India's exports and its integration into the world economy.
Let's shift gears to Section 4, the golden era of growth. We're talking about a very distinct, incredible 5-year window between 2003 and 2008. During this time, India experienced extraordinary economic performance, hitting growth rates that analysts and policymakers today are literally still trying to replicate. So, what caused this? Well, it wasn't magic, right? There was a very specific formula at play here. Step 1. The era began with highly favorable initial macroeconomic conditions, plus the lags benefits from those 90s reforms finally kicking in. Step 2. A distinguishing feature of this time was a massive, unprecedented surge in private corporate savings. Step 3. That saved capital was successfully channeled into absolutely crucial investments in infrastructure. But, as we know, massive global events like the 2008 financial crisis, combined with internal bottlenecks, eventually brought this golden period to an end. Next up, Section 5, demographics, dividend, or debt.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how India's demographic reality goes way beyond just having a large population. First, you start with a demographic deposit. That's the raw youth bulge, the sheer potential workforce. If you can properly train and employ them, it becomes a massive demographic dividend, driving serious, sustained economic growth. But, and this is the absolute critical threat here, if that sprawling youth population is left without adequate employment, it quickly turns into a demographic debt, which can lead to deep social and economic distress. India is in a very narrow window of opportunity right now. They've got to ensure they collect the dividend and avoid the debt.
And finally, that brings us to Section 6, poverty and global integration.
Domestically, tracking progress means you have to measure poverty accurately. And believe it or not, that is an academic battleground in itself. Moving away from earlier measurement methods, the Rangarajan methodology fundamentally altered how the poverty line was calculated. They started looking past just caloric intake and actually updated the consumption baskets to include things like clothing and housing. This fundamentally changed the statistical lens through which India evaluates its own poverty alleviation efforts. But here's the catch. To really eradicate that domestic poverty, India needs external, export-led growth. And that means moving up the global value chain, or GVC, in 21st century merchandise trade. But there are major tensions here. When you compare India's most favored nation tariffs, their standard trade rates, with those of the broader Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation economies, serious questions arise about how open India's trade policy actually is. And internally, well, this clashes directly with the great labor market debate. Do you implement flexible labor laws to attract global manufacturing, or do you maintain rigid, robust protections for the workers you already have? It's a tough balance. So all of this leaves us with one massive, vital question. Given the ongoing struggles in manufacturing and the fierce, unresolved debates over labor and trade, can India's unique services sector-led growth model truly pave the way for a fully developed nation, a Viksit Bharat, by the year 2047? It is a completely unprecedented path, and the whole world is watching to see how it plays out. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope this helped you structure your understanding of India's incredible economic journey. Keep questioning the data, and I'll catch you next time.